I'm still trying to formulate a question in my head because it's something that's just come up in the last week, and it's an issue that's come out of the US more recently through commercial confidentiality, through private prisons and private immigration prisons, and that PETA, Persons for Ethical Treatment of Animals, is the second highest shareholder in private prisons and immigration detention centres. And I actually feel quite sick about that because we have, you know, issues of animal abuse, issues of the most disadvantaged people in our communities being criminalised, particularly Aboriginal people, Aboriginal women, and then people seeking refuge in countries and where they're incarcerated and where the animal rights movement, well, that corporation, is actually making money on the backs of disadvantaged human beings. And I don't like that that's happening in the US, and it really is something that I'm fearful that it's going to occur in this country because of privatisation, especially around, you know, more prisons, more immigration prisons. So, yeah, when we dismiss animal torture, we dismiss human torture. How do we work together as a movement to stop all type of torture?
I mean, I think that whoever operates these places, immigration detention centres or prisons, I mean, the fundamental problem is the incarceration, it's the deprivation of liberty. So there are real concerns at times about how they're operated. But to my mind, in a sense, for asylum seekers and refugees, the fundamental problem is it's not so much how you implement proper standards of human rights within this for asylum seekers, I should say. It's not so much, in a sense, the question of how to be more humane or implement human rights standards within immigration detention, because the problem is that there's already been a fundamental breach of rights by consigning people to that situation. So it's like a double breach in a sense. Then, in other words, or put another way, in international law, there is a prohibition on arbitrary detention, and there's a good reason for it. The reason is that arbitrary detention is likely to be very harmful, and so it's harm upon harm. So who sort of then carries out who operates the centre can be a serious issue, but I think that it's a question of how harmful, not whether it is.
Sure, but as a prison abolitionist, for any type of prison, like once your freedom is taken away as a prison, call it immigration detention, call it juvenile justice, call it corrective services. The issue is that people shouldn't be locked up in the first place, and an animal rights corporation shouldn't be making money on the backs of the most disadvantaged who are locked in those prisons for profit. That's the concern. Like, from the starting point as an abolitionist, no one should be locked up. Because we know who are locked up. There may be some, a small percentage in our community that need to be removed from society because they'll bring harm, but I don't advocate that they go into a prison because it's actually a violent environment. So it's about how do we all work together for the abolition of these structures that cause great harm for all our communities.
Should we be taking that as a statement?
I can just quickly just respond and say I'm an abolitionist of a number of things, including jails, but also animal suffering and eating them, but that's my personal thing. First of all, I'd be concerned. I saw that come across my emails, and I thought we'll have a look at that later. There's a lot of misinformation that is generated out there when organisations are engaging in social justice practices, so I would have my bullshit detector out first, because I may not necessarily believe that it's true, that it's a bit of misinformation to damage what is otherwise a credible organisation. Secondly, if they are, then as I said as part of my presentation, I chew and walk gum at the same time. I have concerns about people in detention, people incarcerated, animals, women who experience domestic violence, Indigenous injustice. So for me, it is across the spectrum. So I would certainly condemn PETA if that's what they've done. I don't think that fits within a social justice framework.
Have we just got time for one more? Okay, we've got so many people on questions. But don't worry, because all these guys are going in the continued discussion space, and you can grab your cup of tea and go in there and unbundle them.
Hi, sorry, I actually had a question, I suppose, for all three, because of really like that. Essentially, I think that all three of you work in areas where the public is not necessarily behind you. I mean, with animal rights, people look away from it because it's too painful. With Indigenous and violence, people are silenced and there's shaming. And with refugees, there's like so much deliberate misinformation going on. Like, how far do you think we can address this through law without, I suppose, addressing these public misconceptions and these attitudes. Like, what do you guys think about, I suppose, how to change that as well as like do it legally?
Okay.
I guess the answer to that is I've probably spent the last 30 years of my life being an activist as much as anything else. I think for all the people in this room that we're lawyers and we're activists, the work that I do includes, there's a slide I forgot to show, which was a demonstration that we ran in our small country town against live exports. So we can't just rely on one thing, which is going to courts. We have to win the forum of public support. So we need to get out there. We have to do community awareness, community development, community legal education. And at the Northern Rivers Community Legal Centre, in fact most community legal centres, a big part of what we do is about taking the public with us, belonging to our communities, talking with our communities. So yes, we must do that at the same time.
I didn't really go into this in my presentation, but I'm not practicing for that reason, because I think I can make more of a difference doing the work that I'm doing rather than just working with one client. But that's my view. We are always encouraging lawyers to be culturally aware, know their clients. That's one thing that we've had a real concern about with lawyers in the private sector and community legal centres that work with our clients, that they don't understand the history, you know, the stuff that I spoke about this morning, why a woman cannot necessarily leave the area that she's living in to escape the violence because of, you know, family connections and all of that kind of stuff. So we do a bit of work around that. I encourage you to make yourself culturally aware, and it's not just a one-off thing. It's an ongoing process. And also some of our work is around improving accessibility in the court system. One of the biggest issues that we have at the moment is with family report writers. You know, when our clients have to speak to the family report writers, but they're not acknowledging the violence, they're not culturally aware, they don't understand the issues, so our clients are getting a bum deal because of that. Yeah.
Just very much agree with both speakers. Just to try and add a couple of extra observations. And one is that, of course, the law is not the only thing we do. There are other issues. Part of it, though, is complex because some of the legal challenges that have become, if I can call it, necessary, you know, that land on your kitchen bench or whatever, sort of, if you like, the genesis of them does relate to a pretty toxic political environment and, you know, and policies that develop out of them, which essentially harm people fleeing from harm in my area. They're very harmful things and unnecessary and etc. I think it's tremendously important to focus on there are at least two key areas. One is in the area of, if you like, social movement, changing the story in this country. When can you last remember a political leader in this country telling us, giving some explanation about why it is that people risk their lives getting on boats, coming here, and then, under rigorous examination by the government, overwhelmingly found to be refugees. Almost everyone who comes by boat, and has in the last decade or more, has actually been then found to be a refugee. But when can you last remember a political leader explaining why that is, and indeed making the link between the fact that many of those people are fleeing from precisely the same extremism and brutality that our troops have been fighting against in places like Afghanistan, etc. Imagine if that happened. So there is a deep failure of political leadership. But while that goes on, there is another very important element, and that is getting to know people, breaking down barriers by people by getting to know people in the community. And look, the most important social movement in my area in the last decade or more has been Rural Australians for Refugees, where not the usual suspects, perhaps some of us are, but throughout Australia, in rural and remote areas and regional areas, many refugees were settling and have been settling and becoming part of communities, and barriers breaking down. And then the injustices of the policy, such as in the past denial of family reunion, etc., have become evident to ordinary Australians. And when they get to know people, refugees, and get to know them as people and work with them, their kids go to school together, etc., it's the same old human story that barriers break down, the story starts to change, and the truth becomes far clearer, rather than the terrible myth peddling that goes on at a political level. So I think there's those two issues, but we've got to change the story in this country. It's and draw upon something that we've, I think, also lost sight of, and that is some other far more positive narratives, such as the great humanitarian tradition in Australia, which is, especially since the Second World War, where we've resettled over 750,000 refugees, and we're good at it. So things like that, calling upon those far more positive traditions.
Again, a big round of applause for